The first shot cracked across the Wyoming plain just as the noon stage was due, and Eli Easton would remember for the rest of his life that he heard the gunfire before he ever saw the woman who fired it. It was the spring of 1879, and the town of Cedar Hollow sat like a scattering of dropped matchsticks against the base of the Laramie Mountains, a dusty huddle of clapboard buildings that had grown up around a stage stop and a livery and little else. Eli had ridden in that morning with his good hat brushed clean and his boots polished with tallow because he was expecting a bride, and a man ought to look decent for such an occasion, even if his hands were rancher's hands, thick-knuckled and sun-browned, and his shirt collar had never once in his life sat easy around his neck. He stood now beside the stage office with old Tom Pickett, who had worked the Easton spread since before Eli's father passed it down, and with Reverend Michael Carter, who had agreed to perform the ceremony the moment the stage rolled in. A handful of Cedar Hollow's women had gathered near the mercantile with the particular hunger of small towns for anything resembling news, whispering behind gloved hands about the mail-order bride the rancher had sent for all the way from Kansas. "You are certain about this, son?" Reverend Carter asked, not unkindly, watching Eli check his pocket watch for the third time in 5 minutes. A man can know a woman through letters and still not know her at all. "I know her handwriting better than I know my own," Eli said. "I know she buried her mother young and lost her father to hard times, and I know she asked me twice whether the winters here were as cruel as the ones in Kansas, because she did not want to freeze again. A woman does not write like that unless she has known real trouble and come out the other side of it wanting something better." Old Tom, who had seen 40 years of Wyoming weather carve lines into his own face, only grunted and said nothing, which from old Tom was as good as a sermon. It was then that the gunfire sounded, thin and far off, rolling down off the flats to the south where the road curled around Split Rock Ridge. Every head in Cedar Hollow turned toward the sound. A second shot followed closer, and then a third, and Eli felt the peculiar cold drop in his stomach that came before trouble, the same feeling he'd had the day his father's horse threw a shoe on ice and broke its leg, the same feeling he'd had the morning his wife Sarah had not woken from her fever 3 winters past. "Riders," old Tom said, shading his eyes. "Coming hard." They came over the last rise in a spray of dust, 4 horses, and it took Eli a long moment to understand that the rider in front was not one of the pursuers but the pursued. She rode low over the neck of a lathered bay horse, one hand knotted in the reins, the other holding a Winchester rifle braced against her hip, and even at that distance Eli could see her dark hair had come loose from whatever pins had once held it and was streaming behind her like a banner torn in a storm. She was not wearing white. She was not wearing a veil. She wore a man's canvas coat over a traveling dress gone gray with road dust, and there was blood on her sleeve that Eli prayed was not her own. "Lord have mercy," breathed one of the women by the mercantile, and then there was a general scattering as folks remembered that bullets did not care whose business they were. The 3 men chasing her fired again, and this time Eli heard the whine of the shot pass somewhere over the stage office roof, and something in him that had been quiet and careful his whole life since Sarah died simply stood up and would not sit back down. He ran for the hitching rail where his own rifle waited in its scabbard on his saddle, and old Tom was shouting for someone to fetch the sheriff, and the woman on the bay horse came thundering into the center of Cedar Hollow's one dusty street and hauled back on the reins, so hard the animal nearly sat down on its haunches. She swung off before it had fully stopped, rifle already coming up to her shoulder, and turned to face the 3 riders bearing down on the edge of town. She did not look at Eli. She did not look at anyone. She sighted down the barrel with the calm of a woman who had done this before and fired once, and one of the pursuing horses shied so violently its rider was nearly thrown, and the 3 of them reined up hard at the town limits, cursing, clearly unwilling to ride further into a settlement full of witnesses, and now Eli's own rifle leveled from beside the stage office. "That is close enough," Eli called out, and his voice came out steadier than he felt. "Whatever quarrel you have, you will not settle it in my town." The lead rider, a raw-boned man with a scar through one eyebrow, spat into the dust. "That woman is a wanted outlaw, mister. There is paper on her signed by a federal marshal. You are harboring a criminal." "I am harboring a woman standing in a public street," Eli said. "If you have paper, you can show it to the sheriff, who I expect is walking up that road behind me right about now." Sure enough, Sheriff Wyatt Dalton, a broad, deliberate man of perhaps 50 who had kept the peace in Cedar Hollow for a dozen years, was striding up with his own shotgun cradled in his arms and a scowl that could curdle milk. The three riders looked at the sheriff, looked at the gathered townsfolk, looked at the rifle in the woman's hands that had not once wavered, and decided, as men like that usually did, that today was not the day to press their luck. They wheeled their horses and rode back the way they had come, and the sound of their hooves faded into the general hush of the plains, and Cedar Hollow was left holding its breath. It was only then that the woman lowered her rifle and turned, and Eli got his first real look at the face of the bride. He had been expecting to meet with a veil and a Bible and a nervous smile. She was younger than he had pictured from her letters, though not by much, 26 perhaps, with a strong jaw and eyes the deep brown of good river clay, and there was nothing nervous in her expression at all. There was exhaustion and a wariness that ran down to the bone, and beneath both of those, unmistakably, there was fear not for herself. Eli would come to understand later, but for what her arrival had just brought down on a town of strangers. "Mr. Easton," she said, and her voice shook only a little. "I am Nellie Boone. I expect this is not how you pictured meeting me." Eli lowered his rifle slowly and found, to his own surprise, that his heart was hammering not from the danger but from something else entirely, something that had no business showing up so fast, though it would take him weeks yet to give it its true name. "No, ma'am," he said. "I pictured a veil." Nellie Boone's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, more the ghost of one that had forgotten how. "I lost the trunk with the dress in it about 6 miles back, along with most everything I own. I am sorry for the trouble I have brought to your town." Sheriff Dalton had come up beside them now, and he was looking at Nellie with the particular flat expression of a lawman doing arithmetic in his head. "Boone," he said slowly, "as in the Boone gang out of the Nebraska Panhandle. Stage robberies, 3 of them if the wanted circulars I have seen are to be believed." "Yes, sir," Nellie said, and did not look away from him, which Eli noted and respected even before he understood the whole of it. "I will not lie to you, Sheriff, because I expect you would find the truth easy enough on your own. I rode with my brother's outfit for the better part of 2 years. I am not proud of it. I am trying to stop." A ripple went through the gathered townsfolk at that, and Eli heard someone behind him mutter the word outlaw like a curse, and he felt more than decided that he was not going to let this woman stand alone in the street to be judged by people who had not lost what she had lost. "Sheriff," Eli said, "is there a warrant for her arrest, or only a poster with a bounty on it? Because those are not the same thing under any law I know of." Dalton considered this, chewing the inside of his cheek. "There is a federal circular out of the marshal's office in Cheyenne. Bounty hunters ride on those regular enough, paper or no paper. But you are correct that I have received no formal warrant through proper channels for a Nellie Boone specifically. Her brother Jesse now, there is paper on him plain enough, for robbery and worse. Then unless you have cause to arrest her yourself, this is between her and whoever holds that bounty, and I would remind you that 3 armed strangers just fired shots into my town chasing her, which makes them the ones who broke the law today, not her." Dalton studied Eli for a long moment, and then studied Nellie, and something in his weathered face softened by a fraction, though his voice stayed gruff. "I am not in the business of hanging women in the street on the word of bounty men, Mr. Easton, but I will be keeping an eye on this situation and on you. You understand that. I would not expect any less of you, Sheriff." Reverend Carter, who had been standing quietly through all of this with his Bible still clutched to his chest, cleared his throat. "Given the circumstances, I think perhaps the ceremony ought to wait a spell. There is a great deal here that wants sorting out first." Nellie's eyes flicked to Eli then, searching, and he understood she expected him to send her away, to decide that whatever had been building itself in careful letters over 2 months of correspondence was not worth the trouble now standing plainly in front of him with blood on her sleeve and a bounty on her head. "You are welcome at my ranch, Miss Boone," Eli said instead, "for as long as it takes to sort things out proper. I gave you my word in every letter I sent that you would have a home here if you wanted one. I do not go back on my word, because the road in was harder than expected." Something moved behind Nellie's eyes then, something that looked almost like disbelief, as though kindness were a language she had not heard spoken in a long while and needed a moment to translate. "You do not know what you are risking, Mr. Easton." "I have a fair guess," Eli said, "and I will tell you plain, Miss Boone, that I have buried a wife already and buried a good deal of caution along with her. Whatever risk you are, I expect you are worth it." It was a bold thing to say to a stranger in the middle of a dusty street with the whole town listening, and Eli felt his own ears go hot the moment it left his mouth. But Nellie Boone did not laugh at him, and did not look away, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with letters written across 2 months, and everything to do with the particular quiet that follows a storm. They rode out to the Easton Ranch together that same afternoon, Nellie on the borrowed bay horse and Eli beside her on his own gelding, old Tom trailing behind with what remained of Nellie's baggage salvaged from the road. The ranch sat some 4 miles outside of Cedar Hollow in a wide green bowl of a valley, where Sweetwater Creek cut a silver ribbon through the grass, and the house itself was a solid 2-story affair of hewn logs and whitewashed clapboard that Eli's father had built with his own hands 30 years before. Cattle dotted the far slopes like scattered dark beads, and the mountains stood blue and serrated against the sky, and Nellie Boone looked at all of it with an expression Eli could not quite read. "It is beautiful," she said finally. "I had almost forgotten land could look like this. Where I come from, the land got taken from us before I had the chance to love it properly." "Tell me," Eli said, and it was not really a question so much as an invitation. And Nellie, perhaps because she was tired in the deep way that made secrets feel heavier to carry than truths, told him. Her father, she said, had run a modest cattle operation in the Nebraska Panhandle, decent land along a river bottom, nothing grand but honest and paid for. A cattle baron named Harlan Grissom had wanted that river bottom for himself, wanted it badly enough to first offer an insulting price, and when that failed, to manufacture a debt against the Boone family through a crooked banker in his pocket, claiming a note that Nellie's father had never actually signed. When Nellie's father tried to fight the forged paper in court, Grissom's hired men had ambushed him on the road home from the county seat and called it highwaymen, and no one in that county had dared say otherwise because everyone owed Harlan Grissom something. "My brother Jesse was 20 then, I was 17, Nellie said, her voice gone flat and careful in the way of someone reciting an old wound so it would not open fresh. "We had no money, no land anymore, and no law willing to help us because Grissom owned the law in that county the way he owned everything else. Jesse said the only justice we would ever get was the kind we took ourselves. He started robbing Grissom's freight wagons and stage lines. I did not want that life, Mr. Easton, but I was 17 and alone in the world except for my brother, and a girl alone in this country does not have so very many choices as folks like to pretend. I do not judge you for surviving," Eli said quietly. "I have never once gone hungry a day in my life, and I will not sit on a horse and tell a woman who has that she should have chosen differently." Nellie looked over at him with something like gratitude, raw and unguarded. 2 years I rode with Jesse's outfit. We never killed a man, whatever the posters say, though I will not pretend we never frightened plenty and stole a good deal that was not ours, even if some of it was only ever taking back a piece of what Grissom had already stolen from us. But it ate at me, Mr. Easton. Every job made me feel less like my father's daughter, and more like something I did not recognize in a looking glass. When I saw your advertisement in a Cheyenne newspaper, a stage passenger left behind at a way station, something in me just said, there, that is the door out, before I even wrote the first word. And your brother let you go. Nellie's jaw tightened. My brother does not know I am gone for good. He thinks I rode ahead to scout a job in Cheyenne. When he finds out I mean to stay gone, mean to marry a stranger and live an honest life on the other side of the territory, he will not take it well. Those men chasing me today were not bounty hunters, Mr. Easton. 2 of them ride with Jesse. He must have grown suspicious and sent them after me when I slipped away in the night. Eli absorbed this in silence for a moment, watching a hawk wheel slow circles above the creek. Then the danger is not only from the law or from strangers hunting a bounty, it is from your own family as well. Yes, Nellie said, and there was something terribly lonely in the single word. I am sorry I did not put all of this in my letters. I was afraid if I told you the whole truth you would never send for me at all, and I wanted so badly to believe there was a life waiting somewhere that was not built on stolen silver and empty saddlebags. I am glad you did not tell me, Eli said, and when she turned to him in surprise he went on, because if you had, I might have let fear talk me out of something my letters told me was worth having long before I ever laid eyes on you. I do not say that lightly, Miss Boone. I mean to keep my word to you, whatever comes riding down that road after it. They reached the ranch house as the sun was going long and gold across the grass, and old Tom's wife, a broad, capable woman named Martha Pickett who cooked and kept house for Eli since Sarah's passing, came out onto the porch wiping flour from her hands and looking Nellie over with the frank appraisal of a woman who had raised 4 sons and did not scare easy. Well, Martha said at last, you look like you have been rode hard and put away wet, dear, which I suppose you have. Come on in and get that arm looked at before it festers, and then you can tell me everything or nothing at all, whichever suits you better. That kindness, small and practical as it was, undid something in Nellie that the whole long terror of the day had not managed to touch, and Eli, standing back by the horses, saw her shoulders shake once silently before she mastered herself and followed Martha inside. The days that followed settled into an uneasy but tender rhythm. Nellie's arm, grazed by a stray shot in the chase though not seriously, healed within the week under Martha's care. Sheriff Dalton rode out twice to ask further questions, each time leaving a little less suspicious and a little more thoughtful, for he was a fair man beneath his gruffness and could see plainly enough that whatever else Nellie Boone might be, she was no threat to Cedar Hollow. The 3 riders who had chased her did not return, though word filtered through the territory grapevine that a bounty hunter named Cutter Malone, a hard, methodical man known for collecting on federal circulars others considered too dangerous or too much trouble, had taken an interest in the price on Jesse Boone's gang, and by extension on Nellie. Eli did not press her for a wedding date. He found, somewhat to his own surprise, that he wanted to earn something rather than simply claim it, wanted Nellie Boone to choose him not because a mail-order arrangement obliged her to, but because 2 people standing in the same kitchen every morning had come to genuinely want each other's company. So he gave her chores instead of vows, put her to work mending fence and gentling a green colt he had been meaning to break, because he had written in his very first letter to her, long before he had ever seen her face, that he wanted a partner for a hard life and not an ornament for an easy one, and he found he had meant that more than he knew. Nellie took to the ranch work with a fierce and grateful energy that told Eli plainly how long she had gone without a task that let her feel useful in an honest way. She rose before dawn to help Martha with the milking. She rode the fence lines with old Tom until she knew every post and wire as well as he did. In the evenings, When the chores were done and the light was failing gold over the western ridges, she and Eli took to walking down along Sweetwater Creek, and it was there, over the course of many such evenings, that the careful correspondence of 2 months became something else entirely. "You write better letters than you talk," Nellie told him once, teasing, as they sat on a flat rock above the creek watching the water run silver over stones. "I had more time to think on paper," Eli admitted. "A man can cross out a foolish sentence before he sends it, cannot do the same once it is out of his mouth." "What was the most foolish sentence you crossed out?" Eli considered lying, and then found he did not want to, not with her. "I wrote in my second letter that I hoped you might come to love this land the way I love it, before I had even asked whether you might come to love me. I thought that was putting the cart ahead of the horse, so I struck it out." Nellie was quiet a moment, watching the water. "I think," she said finally, "that I would rather have read that sentence than the one you kept instead." "What did I keep instead?" "You wrote that the winters here were hard, but the springs made up for them tenfold. I remember thinking, sitting in a line shack somewhere in Nebraska with my brother's men arguing about split shares from a robbery, that I would give a great deal to see a spring that made up for anything." "Have you seen one yet?" Eli asked, and gestured at the valley around them, green and riotous with new grass and wildflowers, the creek running full with snowmelt, the mountains still capped white but softening at their shoulders. "I am beginning to," Nellie said softly, and when she looked at him then, there was nothing guarded left in her face at all, and Eli felt something settle into place in his chest that had been unsettled since the day Sarah died, some old grief finally making room for something new to grow beside it rather than instead of it. It was perhaps 3 weeks after her arrival that Jesse Boone came. He came at night, as Eli should have expected a man in his position to come, slipping up along the creek bed on foot after leaving his horse tied a half-mile off, and it was only the ranch dog's low growling that woke Eli at all. He rose and took his rifle from beside the bed and went down to the kitchen to find Nellie already there in her nightdress and shawl, a lamp turned low, standing at the window with her own rifle in hand, and he understood in an instant that some sense between siblings, some old alarm bred by years of danger, had woken her before the dog had even started. "It is Jesse," she said quietly. "I know his walk even in the dark." Eli set his rifle down but kept it close, and went to open the door before the man outside could decide knocking was too great a risk. Jesse Boone stood on the porch step in the moonlight, a lean, hard-eyed man of perhaps 30 with his sister's same strong jaw, and none of her softness left visible on the surface, though Eli would come to see later that it was there, buried deep beneath years of bitterness, the way coal is buried beneath rock. "Nellie," Jesse said, and his voice cracked slightly on the single syllable, betraying something the rest of him worked hard to hide. "You had me thinking you were dead in a ditch somewhere. Cutter Malone is riding this territory asking questions about a woman who fits your description marrying a Wyoming rancher. I am not dead, Jesse. I am home, or as close to it as I have felt in years." "Home?" Jesse's laugh had no humor in it. "This is not home, Nellie. This is a stranger's ranch you have gotten yourself locked into because you were tired and scared and wanted someone to promise you it would all be easy from here. It is never easy. You know that better than anyone." "I know it," Nellie said, and her voice was steady even as her eyes glistened in the lamplight. "But I would rather have a hard, honest life here than an easy, stolen one out there, Jesse. I have told you that 100 times and you have never once heard me. I hear you fine. I just do not believe you can outrun what we are. Grissom's men are still out there, Nellie. The debt he manufactured against Pa is still on the books in that county, still drawing interest, still being used to justify every lie he tells about our family. You think leaving the outfit erases any of that? You think this rancher's ring on your finger makes Grissom forget he wants us both dead or in irons so no one ever questions how he came to own half of that river bottom?" Eli, standing quiet in the doorway, spoke then, careful and even. "Mr. Boone, I do not know you, and you do not know me, but I will tell you plain that I mean to protect your sister with everything I have, and that includes whatever trouble follows her here, whether it wears a badge or an outlaw's bandana. If Grissom's reach extends even into Wyoming Territory, I would like to know the shape of that reach so I can plan against it, rather than be surprised by it. Jesse studied him for a long moment in the moonlight, and something in his hard face shifted, a grudging reassessment. You would fight Grissom's men for a woman you have known 3 weeks. I would fight anyone who meant her harm, Eli said simply. That arithmetic does not require much time to work out. Jesse looked between Eli and his sister, and something passed over his face that looked almost like envy quickly buried. You are a fool, rancher, but maybe the kind of fool she needs. Nellie, listen to me. Cutter Malone does not work for pocket change bounty. Grissom hired him direct. I have that from a man in Cheyenne who owed me a favor. Grissom wants us found and wants us dead or hanged quiet, because there is talk in that county now of the old debt being re-examined by a new circuit judge, and Grissom cannot afford witnesses who remember how that debt truly came to exist. Nellie went very still. A new judge. Jesse, if there is a chance, even a small one, to expose what Grissom did to Pa, there is no proof, Jesse cut in bitter. We looked for years, Nellie. Grissom is careful. The forged note vanished, the banker who helped him died of a fever conveniently soon after, and every witness who might have spoken up was either bought or scared quiet. There might be proof, Nellie said slowly, something kindling behind her eyes. Pa kept his own ledger books separate from what the bank held. He was proud that way, never trusted paper he had not written himself. If that ledger survived the fire at the old house, the house burned to the ground the week after the ambush, Jesse said. You know that. The house burned. The root cellar did not. Pa kept a strongbox down there for the ledgers in case of flood. I do not know if anyone ever thought to look. Jesse's expression, for the first time since he had appeared on the porch, showed something other than bitterness. Hope, Eli thought, was a hard and dangerous thing for a man like Jesse Boone to feel, and it sat awkwardly on his features, like a coat that had once fit and no longer did. That is a long ride back into a county that wants us both hanged, Jesse said. Then we had better plan carefully, Eli said, and both Boone siblings turned to look at him with matching expressions of surprise. I have men here, I have horses, and I have no love at all for cattle barons who forge debts against honest ranching families to steal their river bottoms. If there is a chance to bring Harlan Grissom to real justice and clear your family's name in the process, I do not see why we should not take it, done carefully and with the law informed at every step rather than run around it. You would help my brother, Nellie said softly, after everything he has done. I would help clear an injustice, Eli said. Your brother is part of that, whether I like the company or not. And Nellie, if this works, if there is real proof of what Grissom did, it does not only clear your father's name. It clears yours. No more running. No more looking over your shoulder every time a stranger rides into Cedar Hollow. The weight of that possibility settled over all 3 of them in the quiet kitchen, and Jesse Boone, hard-eyed outlaw that he was, looked for a long moment like a much younger man, one who remembered what it had felt like to have a home before it was stolen from him. They laid their plans over the following days, with the caution of people who understood that a single misstep could cost everything. Eli rode into Cedar Hollow and spoke privately with Sheriff Dalton, laying out what Nellie and Jesse had told him, watching the sheriff's face darken with the particular anger of a lawman confronted with proof that the law itself had been twisted to serve a rich man's greed. I have heard rumor of Grissom's dealings before, Dalton admitted, leaning back in his office chair with his hands laced over his stomach. Man like that does not build an empire on square dealing alone, not in this territory, not in any territory I have ever worked. But rumor is not proof, Easton, and I cannot move against a man of his standing on the word of his supposed victims alone. Folks will say the Boones have every reason to lie. Then we get the proof, Eli said. The ledger, if it survived. And if the circuit judge is already looking freshly at that old debt, as Jesse claims, then real evidence handed to him direct might carry more weight than anything filed through Grissom's own county sheriff. Dalton considered this, tapping his fingers on the desk. I will write a letter to Judge Aldous Whitfield myself, then, vouching for what I know of you and asking he hear this matter fair when the evidence comes, if it comes. That is the most I can offer without overstepping my own jurisdiction. The rest of it, riding into that county and digging up a strongbox from a burned root cellar, while Grissom's men and a bounty hunter are hunting for the very people doing the digging, that is a fool's errand I cannot officially sanction, though I will admit I have a certain admiration for fools who fight for the right reasons. It was decided in the end that Eli, Nellie, and Jesse would ride together, along with old Tom, who insisted with a stubbornness that would not be argued down that a man his age had earned the right to a little danger before he got too old and stiff to enjoy it. They would travel light and fast, avoiding the main road where Cutter Malone was most likely watching, and aim to reach the old Boone homestead in the Nebraska Panhandle within 4 days' hard riding. The night before they left, Nellie found Eli alone on the porch, looking out at the dark shapes of the mountains against a sky thick with stars, and she came and stood beside him without speaking for a long while. "You do not have to come," she said finally. "This is not your fight, Eli. It is mine and Jesse's, ours to finish or fail at. It became my fight the day you rode into Cedar Hollow with a rifle instead of a veil," Eli said, and turned to look at her, close in the darkness, close enough that he could see the starlight caught in her eyes. "I told you once that whatever risk you were, I expected you were worth it. I have had 3 weeks now to test that expectation, Nellie Boone, and I have found it to be true beyond anything I imagined when I wrote it. I am not letting you ride into danger without me beside you. That is not the kind of man I want to be, and it is not the kind of husband I mean to become to you, if you will still have me once this is finished." Nellie's breath caught, and in the darkness Eli could not quite tell if the shine on her cheek was starlight or tears. "You have not even properly courted me, Eli Easton. We have not danced. We have not been to church together as anything but strangers in the same pew, and you are already speaking of husbands." "Then let us finish this business with Grissom," Eli said, low and warm, "and come home, and I will court you proper, dances and church pews and all of it, for as long as you like before I ever ask you formally. But I wanted you to know, before we ride into whatever danger waits out there, that my heart has already made its decision. I would be glad if yours might be leaning the same direction." "It has been leaning that direction," Nellie whispered, "since a man stood in the middle of a dusty street with his own rifle raised and told strangers they would not settle their quarrel in his town, and then turned to a woman covered in road dust and blood, and told her she was still welcome in his home. I do not think I had a chance after that, Eli, though I fought it a while out of habit, because trusting easily has never once kept me safe." Eli reached out then slowly, and took her hand, and she let him, and they stood together on the porch in the vast dark quiet of the Wyoming night, 2 people who had found each other by the strangest and hardest of roads, and for a moment neither of them said anything more at all, because nothing more needed saying. They rode out before dawn, 4 riders moving fast and quiet across the open country, skirting the main road, camping cold without fires where the smoke might give them away. Old Tom proved himself, despite his years, a man who could still read a trail and a sky better than most 20-year-olds, and Jesse, whatever his crimes, rode with the hard competence of a man who had spent years staying 1 step ahead of pursuit. Nellie rode between them all with a set, determined face, and Eli found himself watching her more than he watched the horizon, marveling at the steel in her that had somehow survived years of hardship without breaking entirely. On the 3rd night, camped in a shallow draw with the horses picketed close, Jesse sat across the cold fire pit from Eli while Nellie slept exhausted a short distance away, and spoke low so as not to wake her. "I want to tell you something, rancher," Jesse said. "Nellie never wanted this life. Every job I ever pulled her into, she went along not because she wanted the money or the excitement some fools chase in this business, but because she was afraid of what would happen to me if she was not there to talk sense when things went wrong. More than once she talked me out of something that would have gotten men killed. She has a conscience I stopped having somewhere around the second robbery, and I have always known it, and I have always felt low for using her loyalty against her better judgment. If this ledger clears our name, I mean to let her go free of all of it, whatever happens to me." "What do you mean, whatever happens to you?" Eli asked, frowning. "I mean I have robbed real stages, rancher, taken real money that was not stolen from us first, more than the debt Grissom manufactured could ever justify taking back. There is a point past which a man cannot claim he was only righting a wrong. I passed that point a long while back. If Grissom is exposed and the debt against our father's land is proven false, it clears Pa's name and it clears Nellie, who never took a dollar that was not already stolen from us twice over by Grissom's schemes first. But it does not clear me. I do not expect it to, and I have made my peace with that." Eli was quiet a moment, watching the stars wheel slow overhead. "Your sister loves you whatever you have done. She would grieve terribly to see you hang." "Then I will not hang if I can help it," Jesse said, with a ghost of dark humor. "I hear the territory west of here is wide and mostly unpoliced, and a man with a good horse and a healthy fear of ropes can start something like a new life if he is careful, and if he is willing to work honest from here forward, which I am, rancher, more than you might credit an outlaw for saying. I have done enough taking. I find I would like to try building something instead before I get too old and mean to learn how." "Then I hope you get that chance," Eli said, and meant it, surprising himself with how much he meant it. They reached the burned ruins of the old Boone homestead on the evening of the fourth day, a lonely, wind-scoured stretch of river bottom where charred timbers still stood in broken silhouette against the sunset, nature already beginning the slow work of reclaiming what fire and greed had ruined. Nellie stood a long moment looking at the wreckage of her childhood home, her face unreadable in the fading light, before she led them to a collapsed stone structure some yards from the main house, half buried in weeds and drifted soil. "The root cellar," she said. "Pa built it to last." Said a man who could not trust a bank ought to at least trust stone. It took the better part of an hour, working by lantern light and hard labor with a shovel old Tom had thought to bring, to clear enough rubble to reach the cellar's collapsed entrance, and longer still to pry aside the warped remains of a door that had somehow survived the fire above it. When at last Jesse dropped down into the musty dark and came up a few minutes later with a rusted but intact strongbox cradled against his chest, Nellie made a sound that was half sob and half laughter, and Eli felt his own throat go tight with the enormity of the moment. They forced the strongbox open by lantern light right there among the ruins, unwilling to wait even until morning, and inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had kept the damp mostly at bay, they found a leather-bound ledger in a careful, sturdy hand, recording years of honest accounts, cattle sales, feed purchases, and crucially, a detailed record of a note paid in full to the very bank Grissom's crooked banker had later claimed was still outstanding, complete with the banker's own signature acknowledging the payment, dated a full 8 months before the forged debt that had justified the ambush on Nellie and Jesse's father. "This is it," Nellie breathed, staring at the page in the lantern light as though she could not quite believe it real. "This proves the debt was already settled. Grissom's whole claim was built on a lie he must have known was a lie, because his own banker's signature is right here admitting the truth of it before he ever tried to claim otherwise." "It is enough," Eli said quietly, "to bring before Judge Whitfield. More than enough, I think, to unravel a great deal more than just one false debt, once folks start looking closely at how a man builds an empire on lies like this one." They did not linger long at the ruins after that, mindful that Grissom's men, or Cutter Malone, might yet be watching the roads, and they rode hard through the night to put distance between themselves and the panhandle before dawn. It was on the second day of the return journey, crossing a wide stretch of open grassland with a shallow river to their east, that their luck, which had held remarkably well until then, finally ran out. Cutter Malone found them at a river crossing, and he had not come alone. He came with 3 hired men, all armed, all clearly experienced at this grim business of hunting people for money. And he came with the flat, patient confidence of a man who had done this many times before and expected to do it successfully again. Eli saw them first, a line of riders cresting a low ridge to the south, and called a warning, and there was a scramble to find what little cover the riverbank offered, a scattering of cottonwoods and a low cutbank where the current had eaten into the earth over years of spring floods. Boone. Malone's voice carried clear across the grass, unhurried, almost bored. You and your sister are worth considerably more to me than the trouble of chasing you, but I will collect either way. Come out, and this need not turn ugly. Ugly is your specialty, Malone, not mine, Jesse called back, already sliding off his horse to take cover behind the cutbank, rifle in hand. You are working for Grissom. You know what he is. I am working for money, Malone called back. What Grissom is or is not concerns me exactly as much as it profits me, which is to say, not at all. Eli got Nellie down behind the cutbank beside him, and old Tom found position a short distance off with his own rifle, and for a long, tense moment there was nothing but the sound of the river running and the wind moving through the grass, both sides measuring the other, until Malone's patience, or perhaps simple greed, ran thin, and he gave a low command Eli could not quite hear, and the 4 riders came on at a canter, fanning out to make themselves harder targets. What followed was not the wild, romanticized gun battle of dime novels, but something uglier and more frightening. A scattered exchange of fire across open ground with the river at their backs and nowhere to retreat. And Eli, who had fired a rifle plenty in his life at coyotes, and once, memorably, at a mountain lion that had gotten too bold around his calving pens, found his hand steadier than his racing heart had any right to allow, because Nellie was beside him. And he was not going to let fear make his aim worse than it needed to be. It was Nellie's rifle, in the end, that turned the fight. She had grown up on that river bottom in Nebraska, had spent 2 hard years riding with an outlaw gang where survival depended on marksmanship more than sentiment. And when one of Malone's hired men made the mistake of exposing himself too long trying to flank around the cottonwoods, it was Nellie who put a shot through his rifle stock at 40 yards, close enough to shatter the wood and send the weapon flying from his hands without breaking bone, a display of controlled, deliberate skill that made even Cutter Malone pause and reconsider the wisdom of pressing further. That is a costly shot to waste on a warning, Malone called out, though there was a new caution in his voice. I do not waste shots, Malone, Nellie called back, and Eli, glancing at her in the chaos, saw something fierce and magnificent in her face, a woman utterly unwilling to be hunted any longer. The next one takes a man's hand off at the wrist rather than his rifle from his grip. Think carefully on whether Grissom's money is worth that particular arithmetic. There was a long pause, and then Malone, ever the pragmatist, called a retreat, gathering his remaining men and pulling back to the ridge, though he shouted a final warning before he went. This is not finished, Boone. Grissom does not forgive a debt unpaid, and neither do I. Bring your proof to a judge instead of a rope next time, Jesse shouted back, and we will settle this the honest way, which I know neither you nor Grissom has much practice with. They did not linger to see if Malone would return, breaking camp and riding hard the remaining distance to Cedar Hollow, and it was a weary, saddle-sore but triumphant group that finally rode into Sheriff Dalton's office 4 days after they had left, the recovered ledger safe in Eli's saddlebag, wrapped now in fresh oilcloth against further harm. Dalton read through the ledger's relevant pages with a grim, thorough attention, and when he finished, he looked up with an expression Eli had not seen on the sheriff's face before, something like grim satisfaction. "This is enough to hang Harlan Grissom's whole scheme out to dry," Dalton said. "I will send this direct to Judge Whitfield with my own letter attached, and I will also be sending word to the federal marshal's office regarding one Cutter Malone, who by his own admission just now, relayed to me by 4 witnesses including myself, attempted armed pursuit of persons without a valid warrant, which is a crime whatever bounty poster he thinks excuses it." "And Jesse?" Nellie asked quietly, standing close beside her brother. Dalton studied Jesse for a long moment. "The robberies you are wanted for, Mr. Boone, are real crimes regardless of what drove you to them, and I cannot simply erase that with a wave of my hand. But I will say this. A judge weighing your case alongside clear evidence that your family was the victim of a deliberate, documented fraud, one that cost your father his life and your family its land, is a judge likely to show considerably more leniency than one hearing your case in isolation. I would advise you turn yourself in formally, through proper channels, with this context laid before the court, rather than continue running. Running has not served you well so far, has it?" Jesse's jaw worked for a moment, old habits of distrust warring visibly with a tired, growing hope. "And if I do that, and the court still means to hang me regardless, then you will have at least tried the honest road once in your life, Mr. Boone, and I do not think that is nothing," Dalton said. "For what it is worth, I do not believe a judge inclined to re-examine a corrupt debt fresh is a judge inclined to be harsh without cause. Whitfield is known for fairness, not cruelty." It took another 6 weeks for the matter to fully resolve, weeks during which Jesse turned himself in to federal authorities in Cheyenne, with the ledger's evidence formally entered into the proceedings, weeks during which Harlan Grissom, faced with irrefutable proof of his forged debt, and once investigators began digging properly, a whole pattern of similar frauds against smaller ranchers across 2 counties, found his empire collapsing with startling speed. He was arrested, tried, and eventually sentenced to a lengthy term in the territorial prison, his ill-gotten land seized and much of it, through a legal process Judge Whitfield oversaw personally, returned or compensated to the families he had wronged, though the Boone homestead itself, burned and long fallow, was not something money could fully restore. Jesse Boone, for his part, received a sentence far lighter than he had feared, 3 years in the territorial prison rather than the rope he had long expected, on account of the documented injustice his family had suffered, and the cooperative, honest manner in which he had ultimately surrendered and testified. Nellie wept the day the sentence was read, not from grief but from a relief so total it left her shaking, and Eli, sitting beside her in the crowded courtroom, held her hand and did not let go. 3 years, Nellie whispered to him afterward, outside the courthouse in the bright Cheyenne sunshine. 3 years and then he is free and clear, truly free, no more running, no more looking over his shoulder. I did not let myself hope for anything so good. He will serve his time and come out the other side able to build something honest, Eli said. And you, Nellie Boone, are entirely and permanently cleared of every charge that was ever wrongly laid against you. No bounty, no poster, no fear of a stranger riding into town with bad intentions. That chapter of your life is closed. Nellie turned to him then, there on the courthouse steps with the territorial flag snapping overhead in the wind, and the whole wide sky of Wyoming stretching blue and endless beyond the rooftops, and there were tears on her face that had nothing to do with sorrow at all. You promised me back on the porch that once this business was finished, you would court me properly, she said. Dances and church pews and all of it, before you asked me anything formal. I remember the promise, Eli said, smiling now, feeling something light and joyful bloom in his chest after weeks of danger and tension. I intend to keep it, though I will confess it may be a short courtship, Miss Boone, because I do not believe my heart has any more patience left in it than it has already spent. Then perhaps, Nellie said, stepping closer, we might skip directly to the part where you ask, and let the dances come after as a celebration rather than a test. Eli laughed, a full, unguarded sound that surprised even himself with its lightness. And there on the courthouse steps, in front of old Tom and Martha Pickett, who had traveled with them to see the trial through, and in front of a good number of curious strangers who had no idea what they were witnessing, Eli Easton got down on one knee in the dust of Cheyenne's Main Street and took Nellie Boone's road-worn, capable hand in both of his own. "Nellie Boone," he said, "you arrived in my town with a rifle instead of a veil, and I would not change a single thing about how we met, because it showed me exactly who you are, brave and honest and strong enough to face down whatever life throws at you without ever once losing your heart along the way. I love you. I did not expect to fall so hard or so fast, but I have, and I do not want to spend one more day pretending otherwise. Will you marry me, properly this time, veil and all if you want it, or no veil at all if you would rather, because it is you I want standing beside me, not any particular dress?" "Yes," Nellie said before he had even fully finished, laughing and crying at once. "Yes, Eli Easton, 1,000 times yes, and I think this time I would very much like the veil, if only so I can lift it myself and show you my face the moment I become your wife. Since the last time we met, I had nothing to hide behind at all, and it turned out to be exactly the right way to meet the man I would come to love." They were married 3 weeks later, back in Cedar Hollow where it had all begun, in the small white church Reverend Michael Carter kept at the edge of town, with the whole community turned out to see it. For word had traveled fast and wide of the outlaw bride who had turned out to be nothing of the sort, a woman wronged rather than criminal, and Cedar Hollow, like most small frontier towns, loved nothing better than a story that ended in justice and joy both together. Nellie wore a simple ivory dress that Martha Pickett had helped her sew from good cloth ordered special from Cheyenne, and over her dark hair she wore a veil of fine lace that Martha had kept packed away since her own wedding decades before and had insisted, tearfully, on giving to Nellie as a gift. When the moment came, standing before Reverend Carter with the whole congregation of Cedar Hollow watching, Eli lifted that veil himself, gently, the way he had promised, and found beneath it the same strong, brave face that had ridden into his town 3 months before covered in road dust with a rifle in her hands, except now that face was radiant with a joy that had nothing left in it of fear. "With this ring," Eli said, his voice thick with feeling, "I promise you a home that will never again be taken from you by any man's greed, a love that will never ask you to hide who you are or where you came from, and a partnership, for however many years the good Lord grants us, built on nothing but honesty between us, the very thing you rode 4 days across dangerous country to help protect for your family, and the very thing I mean to protect for ours from this day forward." "With this ring," Nellie answered, her hand steady in his though her voice trembled with emotion, "I promise you the same, Eli Easton, a love as strong as the day I first saw you standing in that street willing to risk everything for a stranger, and a life lived honest and full and grateful for every hard road that brought me finally to you." They kissed to the sound of the whole town cheering, and old Tom Pickett, not a sentimental man by nature, was seen to wipe his eyes rather thoroughly with his kerchief, and even Sheriff Dalton, standing near the back with his hat respectfully removed, allowed himself a broad, uncharacteristic smile. The years that followed were not without their ordinary hardships, the kind every ranching family in that country came to know, hard winters that tested the herds, dry summers that tested the creek, the constant unglamorous labor of building a life from land and cattle and weather. But they were happy years, built on the foundation Eli and Nellie had promised each other at the altar, and the ranch prospered under their combined effort. Nellie's fierce practical competence matched perfectly against Eli's steady patience, each of them making the other better than they had been alone. Jesse Boone served his 3 years at the territorial prison and emerged, true to his word, a changed man, lean and quiet and hungry for honest work rather than easy money. Eli offered him a position as a hired hand at the Easton Ranch without hesitation, and Jesse took to the work with a diligence that surprised everyone but Nellie, who had always known, beneath the hard shell of the outlaw, there beat the heart of a man who had only ever wanted to build something lasting for the family he had lost too young. Within a few years, Jesse had saved enough to buy a modest parcel of his own adjoining the Easton land, and he ran a small but honest herd there. And on Sunday evenings, he was a fixture at his sister and brother-in-law's table, laughing now in a way he had rarely allowed himself in his outlaw years, delighting especially in the children who soon began to fill that table. Their first child, a son, was born in the autumn of 1880, a sturdy, dark-haired boy Nellie and Eli named Thomas, after old Tom Pickett, who wept openly with pride when he learned of the honor and who took to spoiling young Thomas so thoroughly that Martha threatened, with great affection, to ban him from the nursery altogether. 2 years later came a daughter, whom they named Sarah after Eli's first wife, a gesture that moved Eli deeply and that Nellie insisted upon herself, understanding without needing to be told that honoring the dead did not diminish the living, but rather honored the whole long, complicated journey that had brought them all to this particular joy. More children followed across the years, another son named Michael after Reverend Carter, and a final daughter born when Nellie was nearing 40 and had thought her childbearing years behind her, whom they named simply Grace, because that, Nellie said, was the only word that properly described how she felt about the whole unlikely, dangerous, beautiful road that had brought her from a burning homestead in Nebraska to a thriving ranch full of laughing children in Wyoming. Cedar Hollow grew alongside the Easton family. The stage stopped becoming a proper town with a schoolhouse and a second church, and eventually, in 1890, the news that Wyoming had become a full state of the Union, a piece of history that Eli and Nellie celebrated with the whole community at a town gathering where Nellie, standing on the same street where she had once ridden in pursued by gunfire, told the assembled crowd, at Sheriff Dalton's insistent urging, the whole story of her arrival, holding nothing back, because there was no longer anything left to fear from the truth. "I came to this town," she said, her children gathered close around her skirts and Eli's steady hand at her back, "running from a life that was never truly my choosing, carrying a rifle because I did not yet believe the world had any gentler welcome to offer a woman like me. I found instead a man willing to risk his whole peaceful life on the chance that I was worth the trouble I brought with me. I have spent every day since trying to prove he was right to make that bet, and I hope I have managed it, at least a little." "More than a little," Eli said, loud enough for the crowd to hear, and the gathered townsfolk of Cedar Hollow laughed and cheered, and Nellie turned to him with the same brave, unguarded look she had worn the very first day, standing in that dusty street with her rifle finally lowered, and kissed him without any care at all for who might be watching. That evening, after the celebrations had wound down and the children were finally, exhaustedly asleep, Eli and Nellie sat together on the same porch where he had once told her his heart had already made its decision, watching the same mountains turn violet and gray under the same wide, star-scattered sky, and Nellie leaned her head against his shoulder with the easy comfort of two people who had built an entire good life together, out of what had once seemed like nothing but danger and desperation. "Do you ever think," she asked quietly, "about how differently it might have gone if Jesse's men had caught me before I reached town? If Sheriff Dalton had been less fair, or Grissom's men had found that ledger before we did? I think about it sometimes," Eli admitted, "but I do not dwell there long because it did not go that way. It went this way instead, and this way brought me you, and Thomas, and Sarah, and Michael, and Grace, and more happiness than I ever thought a lonely widower rancher had any right to expect from this hard, beautiful country. I would not trade a single frightening moment of how we met for an easier road that led somewhere else." Nellie was quiet a long moment, watching the first stars come out over the Laramie Range, The same mountains that had watched her ride in 3 months pregnant with fear all those years before, now simply watching her live at last, the ordinary and extraordinary joys of a life fully her own. "Worth every risk," she murmured, remembering the words he had said to Sheriff Dalton that very first day. Words that had traveled through Cedar Hollow's gossip mill and become, over the years, something of a local legend. The story townsfolk still told newcomers about the rancher who had staked his whole future on a woman who arrived with a rifle instead of a veil. "Worth every risk," Eli agreed, and pulled her closer against the cool evening air. "And every single day since has only proven it truer, my love. There is no risk in the whole of this wide territory I would not take again gladly, if it led me back to this same porch, this same sky, and you." And there, beneath the vast unhurried stars of a Wyoming autumn night, with their children sleeping safe inside the sturdy walls of the home they had built together, and with the long, hard road that had brought them there finally, fully, peacefully behind them, Eli Easton and Nellie Boone sat together in the quiet, grateful contentment of two people who had found, against every fearful expectation, exactly the life and the love they had never quite dared to hope for.